On the afternoon of February 24, 2020, a 911 dispatcher in Orange County, Florida, picked up a call from a woman in a quiet Winter Park apartment. Her boyfriend, she said, was dead. She told them they'd been playing a game the night before, that he had climbed into a suitcase, that she'd gone to sleep and assumed he would let himself out, and that when she woke up, she found him still inside. It sounded at first like a horrible accident, a prank that went too far. But here is the detail that makes this case different from almost any other. The answer to how Jorge Torres Jr. died was not something investigators had to reconstruct. It wasn't a theory. It wasn't a guess. It was sitting on the killer's own phone, recorded, time-stamped, and impossible to take back. This is the story of Jorge Torres Jr., the man who died begging to be let out of a suitcase in his own home. It's the story of the woman who put him there, Sarah Boone. And it's the story of how, 4 years later, her own recordings would speak for a man who could no longer speak for himself. When sheriff's deputies arrived at the apartment on France Lane, they found Jorge Torres Jr. on the floor near the front door, beside a suitcase. He was unresponsive. He had a cut on his lip and bruising around one eye. He was 42 years old. It matters that we start here with Jorge as a person, because this case became famous for its strangeness. The suitcase, the videos, the bizarre trial. It would be easy to treat him as a punchline in someone else's spectacle, but a man died slowly in the dark in his own apartment, calling out a name. Everything that follows should be measured against that. Jorge Torres Jr. was a son, a brother, and a father of 3. He was born on February 13, 1978, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Jorge Sr. and Blanca Torres. He grew up in a large, tight-knit family surrounded by siblings, the kind of household where loyalty ran deep and everyone stayed close. Those who loved him never claimed he was a saint. To understand the night Jorge died, you have to go back to how he and Sarah Boone came together in the first place. Sarah Boone was born in October of 1977 in Atlanta, Georgia. Her family moved to the Orlando area when she was young. She married a man named Brian Boone in 2005, and the couple had a son before they separated. It was after that divorce that she met Jorge. The two reportedly crossed paths at a bar near her Winter Park home, and by 2016, they were a couple. The relationship moved quickly. Within months, they were living together. To the outside world, they presented as a couple like any other. Two people who had found each other a little later in life, building something out of a fresh start. That was the surface. One of the hardest truths in this case, and the reason it generated such intense debate, is that the relationship between Jorge Torres and Sarah Boone was genuinely toxic.
You do everything to me all the time. All the time. Heartache and pain is what you cause me. Heartache and pain.
How is that?
Keep going. And I dare you. I dare you. I dare you. You get on your fucky little bike and go to fucky work tomorrow. Don't look at me. Don't come close to me. Don't touch me. Do you understand?
What do you mean?
As of this moment, and until I can get you out,
Get the fuck out of here.
I dare you. Yep, look at it.
This was not a simple story of an innocent man and a monstrous woman, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. What the record shows is two people locked in something volatile and destructive. The question the courts would eventually have to answer was not whether their relationship was healthy. It plainly was not. The question was what happened in one specific, fatal moment, and whether anything could justify it. The problems didn't take long to surface. Over the course of their roughly 4-year relationship, The couple's history filled with police reports and arrests. By multiple accounts, Jorge Torres was arrested on domestic violence allegations on several separate occasions during those years. And according to reporting on the case, Sarah Boone bailed him out each time. But the violence, by the record, did not run in only one direction. In July of 2018, both Boone and Torres were charged with battery against each other. The account that emerged described an evening that began at a bar where Boone asked another man for a cigarette, which angered Torres. The argument escalated on the way home and continued once they were inside. Each told a different version of who did what. In one account, Torres dragged Boone and struck her. In another, drawn from an arrest affidavit, it was Boone who reached for Torres's throat with both hands as he walked up the stairs. Two people, two stories, arrests on both sides. This is the part of the case that defense attorneys would later build their entire strategy around, and it deserves to be stated fairly. Sarah Boone's team argued she was a long-term victim of domestic abuse, that she suffered from what they called battered spouse syndrome, and that years of fear had shaped her actions. That argument is not nothing. Domestic violence is real. It is often invisible, and victims sometimes act in ways that are hard for outsiders to understand. A responsible telling of this story has to hold that possibility honestly in view. But holding it in view is not the same as accepting it as a defense for what happened on the night Jorge died. And as we'll see, 12 jurors would ultimately decide it was not. The people closest to Jorge saw the relationship for what it was. His family would later describe Sarah Boone as controlling. His daughters and his ex-wife, testifying years afterward, spoke of a man they felt had been increasingly cut off, sheltered, kept at a distance from the people who loved him. One of his daughters would put it in stark terms, insisting that her father, not Boone, was the one truly trapped in that relationship. There was also a witness whose testimony would matter enormously. Sarah Boone's own ex-husband, Brian Boone. On the day Jorge died, the timeline ran through Brian. Around the middle of the day on the 23rd, Sarah called him about arrangements for picking up their son from school, and he could tell she was intoxicated. She was slurring her words. Then, the following afternoon, she called him again with very different news. Jorge, she said, was dead, and she asked him to come over. That ordinary thread, two co-parents coordinating a school pickup, would become part of the official record of one of the strangest deaths in recent Florida history. Sunday night, February 23, 2020. By Sarah Boone's own account, the evening started gently. The couple drank wine. She would later describe a relaxed day, painting together, working on a puzzle, dancing to music, an ordinary night between two people at home. And then, she said, they decided to play hide and seek. According to Boone, the two of them thought it would be funny to see whether Jorge could fit inside a suitcase. He climbed in. The suitcase was zipped shut, and here the accounts diverge, with Boone at various points suggesting Jorge may have zipped himself in, or that she did it. What is not in dispute is what happened next, because Sarah Boone recorded it. On her phone, investigators would later find two videos taken roughly 11 minutes apart, while Jorge was inside the closed suitcase. In them, the suitcase moves on the floor. Jorge's voice comes from inside it. He calls her name. He tells her clearly that he cannot breathe. In the recording, he says, "Sarah, I can't breathe, babe." Her reply was not to unzip the bag. Her reply was, "That's on you." He says it again. She says it again. On the recordings, she can be heard laughing and bringing up old grievances from their relationship, taunting him about times she felt he had wronged her while he struggled in the dark. 11 minutes between the two videos, and then, by her account, she went upstairs to bed. She said she believed he could get himself out. She fell asleep. This is the moment the entire case turns on, and it's worth being precise about why. The defense wanted the jury to weigh years of alleged abuse. The prosecution's answer was to narrow the frame to those few minutes, because in those minutes, the power dynamic was absolute. Jorge Torres was zipped inside a suitcase. He could not get out. He was not a threat to anyone. He was a trapped man, telling the person outside that he was suffocating. Whatever their history, whatever had passed between them across 4 years, in that moment, there was only one person who could open the zipper, and she didn't. The next afternoon, February 24th, just after 1 o'clock, Sarah Boone called 911. She told the dispatcher her boyfriend was dead. With the dispatcher's guidance, she attempted CPR. It was far too late. When the medical examiner completed the autopsy, the findings were grim and telling. Jorge Torres Jr. had died of asphyxiation, but there was more. Contusions to his forehead, his shoulder, his skull, signs of blunt force trauma. Prosecutors would later argue that while Jorge was trapped inside, Boone had struck the suitcase with a baseball bat. He hadn't simply suffocated by accident. He had been beaten, taunted, and left. Sarah Boone was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. What should have been a relatively straightforward prosecution, given that the death was recorded, instead turned into one of the most chaotic court sagas Florida had seen in years. It took 4 full years for the case to reach trial, and the delays came overwhelmingly from Boone herself. She went through attorney after attorney. By the count that emerged in court, 8 different lawyers represented her over those 4 years, 7 of them court-appointed. They withdrew one after another, citing irreconcilable differences and describing, in hearing after hearing, how impossible she was to work with. One attorney who logged 175 hours on her case said he withdrew after Boone called him a dud and a buffoon. Another described spending more than 20 hours just going through Boone's endless lists and questions. Boone, for her part, submitted handwritten complaints running to 50 pages and more. Eventually, the judge had had enough. In June of 2024, Orange County Circuit Judge Michael Kranick ruled that Sarah Boone had forfeited her right to a court-appointed attorney. In his order, he wrote that it had become clear she would not permit herself to be represented by anyone, that she was, in effect, using the system to delay her own trial indefinitely. His assessment was blunt. Actions speak louder than words. For a time, Boone was set to represent herself, even posting a handwritten advertisement seeking a lawyer, promising that an epic opportunity awaited whoever took her case. A 9th attorney, James Owens, ultimately volunteered to step in just weeks before trial. There's a temptation to treat Boone's courtroom behavior as comic relief. The woman who burned through 9 lawyers, who advertised for representation by hand. But step back and the pattern looks less like chaos and more like control. Across 4 years, the one thing Sarah Boone never lost was the ability to bend the proceedings around herself, to keep the focus on her grievances, her complaints, her version. It is the same dynamic her partner's family described inside the relationship, and it would define her right to the very end. Before the trial, prosecutors offered Boone a deal: plead to manslaughter, and the recommended sentence would be 15 years. She rejected it. At trial, her defense leaned on battered spouse syndrome and self-defense. She took the stand in her own defense, and by accounts of the proceedings, she came across as combative rather than sympathetic, arguing and justifying rather than grieving. The prosecution's case, by contrast, needed almost no narration. They had the videos. They displayed the suitcase itself to the jury. In his closing, one prosecutor stood beside it and called it the box where Jorge Torres was killed. On October 25, 2024, after a roughly 10-day trial, the jury retired to deliberate. They were back in about 90 minutes, guilty of second-degree murder. Sarah Boone, who later said she had expected a lesser charge, showed little emotion as the verdict was read. The sentencing took place on December 2nd, 2024. Before the judge handed down her sentence, the people who had loved Jorge finally got to speak. Through tears, Jorge's mother told the court that Sarah Boone had not only killed her son, she had killed a father, a brother, an uncle. His sister Victoria said Boone had caused a lifetime of pain and that her brother's death had marked her so deeply she could no longer bring herself to fully close a suitcase. His daughter spoke too, holding to what they had said all along, that their father was the real victim here. And then Sarah Boone spoke. Given the chance to address the family of the man she had killed, she read from a prepared statement without visible emotion and used it to catalog her grievances against Jorge, his past abuse, his family's failure, as she saw it, to intervene. Right to the very end, she cast herself as the one who had been wronged. She told the court, "I forgive myself for falling in love with a monster." The judge sentenced her to life in prison. Sit with what that final statement reveals. A jury had just watched videos of Jorge Torres suffocating inside a suitcase while she taunted him. And standing before his grieving mother and daughters, the word she reached for, the word she assigned to the dying man, not to herself, was monster. That is the chilling center of this case, not the suitcase, not even the videos. It's that, after everything, in her own telling, she was still the victim, and the man begging for air was still the villain. Some people, when confronted with the worst thing they've ever done, cannot find a way to see it. Sarah Boone never did. The case is not entirely over even now. Boone's conviction has moved into the long machinery of appeals. She filed a motion for a new trial, which was denied, and has continued to cycle through legal representation. Her defense has raised genuine procedural questions about whether she was properly warned before losing her right to counsel, about rulings during the trial. Those arguments will be tested in the appellate courts. But the central fact is settled. A jury saw the recordings. They deliberated for 90 minutes, and they decided that what happened in that apartment was not a game and not a tragedy of self-defense. It was murder. In the end, the most important witness in the case against Sarah Boone was never called to the stand. It was Jorge Torres Jr. himself, because of 2 videos on a phone she handed over to investigators, likely forgetting what they contained. A man who died alone in the dark got to testify at his own murder trial. His voice, calling her name, his words, telling her he couldn't breathe. The jury didn't have to imagine his final minutes. They could hear them. And against that, her 3 words, "That's on you," became the truest summary of the case anyone could have written. Because in the only moment that mattered, with a trapped man pleading for his life, it really was on her. The zipper was in her hands. The choice was hers. Jorge Torres Jr. deserved a great many things. An ordinary Monday morning, the chance to grow old, the simple dignity of not dying inside a piece of luggage while the person closest to him laughed. He was a man who was loved, who is still loved, and who, in the end, spoke loudly enough to be heard. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in real investigations, shocking cases, and justice served, please subscribe, leave a comment, and join us as we explore more true crime stories.